Welcome to another episode of Journey of Hope, Heart for Lebanon's podcast, where we bring you stories of change and discipleship happening in the country of Lebanon. I'm your host, Elio Constantine, and we're doing this series with Bishop Dr. Yasser Eric, and this is the third episode. Yasser was raised as a radical Sunni Muslim in Sudan from a very young age. He had a deep hatred for the church and for Christians. And after a miracle that happened with you, you turned to Christ at the age of 19. That decision led to your family disowning you and to go as far as having a symbolic funeral for you. And you also were imprisoned in Sudan. Today, you are a bishop within the global Anglican Church and specifically leading a movement of Muslim background believers that spans over 80 countries. You are a Heart for Lebanon partner and a very, very close family friend to us. We love you, and I love having these conversations with you. Thank you for joining me on this special series of Journey of Hope. And today, we're going to be talking about, it's not a controversial subject as much as it's interesting and very complex: the fear of political Islam. And you're going to go ahead and explain what is political Islam in a minute. But over the last 20 to 30 years, there is this global movement that Islam is bad. And there's a lot of fear around it. And many media outlets kind of focus on why we should fear Islam and that kind of drive towards just being cautious and fearful of that religion. So today we're going to disassemble that idea and kind of go into the details of why and where do we go from here and our role as followers of Christ from that fear that we all know that as followers of Christ we should not fear. So what is political Islam, and where did that fear narrative start?
Well, as I said, first of all, fear is one of the biggest problems, because when we fear people or a certain situation, that where we will not be able to act. Yeah, and so that's why we need to differentiate. We need to inform ourselves. We need also to make definitions. When we say Islam, what do we mean by that? When we say political Islam, what do we mean by that? Also when we say liberal, what do we mean by that? So it is always something very important to differentiate and to define the terminologies. Well, when we see Muslims in the West or anywhere, they believe just in God. They pray 5 times a day. They fast. They just like religious people like anybody. This is not the problem, and we cannot start to demonize people just because of practicing the religion. But to Islam, there is another component, which is, I think, it is also a danger for Muslims themselves, not only for non-Muslims. And this is what I call the political Islam. The political Islam is an ideology which does not separate state from religion, the secret and the secular. So you don't find this separation state and church, which we find in the West. The political Islam does not do that. So he sees everything within the Islamic Sharia laws, within the Islamic laws. And that's why in the West they start to speak about the Sharia, separating men and women. They start to speak about halal and haram and all of this. This is a big, big problem. And this has to do with Islam because from the beginning, when the Islamic society in Medina was established, it was not just a religious group. It was also a political group that in it. And that's why when the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt was founded, they were founded because they said the secular governments are not a godly government, and that's why you need to fight them. And then they wanted to have the Sharia. In Sudan was the same thing. Like 1985, the Sudanese government applied the Sharia, which means if somebody will steal, his hand will be cut. If they find a woman and a man working on the street, they're not married, they're not related, they will accuse them of immorality and adultery, and they will punish them.
So the religious law of Islam became the law of government.
Exactly. And so the Muslim Brotherhood, they say, we don't acknowledge any normal civil laws.
Okay.
And they reject it. And that's why they rejected also every civil government.
Okay.
You know, so anything that is not being driven by the Sharia, driven by Islamic laws, especially in dealing with non-Muslims, you know. And so this kind of political Islam that glorify the jihad, you know, and the jihad actually is not only the peaceful way, because the word jihad in Arabic comes from the word juhd, which means any effort that you make is a jihad. Like to pray 5 times a day is a jihad, to fast is a jihad, to be a good Muslim is a jihad. But then the political Islam takes it another way. They said there is the jihad through your tongue. This means if there is something you reject it by your tongue. And the jihad of the hand, that you use your hand to change, which means you can fight, which means you can wage a war, and violence. So the political Islam kind of justify also violence in the name of religion. And that's why we find many problems with ISIS, with Boko Haram in Nigeria, Al-Shabaab in Somalia. The political Islam also divide this world into 2 territories. Dar al-Islam, you know, the house of Islam where the Sharia is being implemented. And there they say peace could govern. And Dar al-Harb, which means the house of war, you know, where the Sharia is not implemented. And there it is legitimized to attack the unbelievers, to kill the unbelievers. And this is a real danger. And the majority victims of the political Islam is actually the Muslim themselves. Yeah. We see that in Iraq. We saw that in Sudan. We see this in Somalia today.
Yeah. So it becomes tricky because these countries are implementing Sharia law and political Islam inside their own countries. Where does the church stand in these countries? What is the situation of followers of Christ and churches inside countries where Sharia law is applied, like Somalia or Sudan or Iraq or wherever in that part of the world?
Well, the church is suffering. Actually, not only the church, any minority, any people who are not conformed by the laws of Islam, they suffer. Like, for instance, if a Muslim will become a Christian or leave Islam and be anything else, he will be called murtad, you know, apostate, and the apostate should be killed, allowed the Sharia. You know, during Ramadan, I mean, Muslims fast, which is not a problem, but those who are non-Muslims, they're also forced, you know, to be conform with that. Women, you know, like mixing women and men and all of the things. So even though they are not Muslims, they will be under the Sharia law. And this is actually the problem that we had in Sudan. Like 1985, when the Sharia was implemented, the Southern Sudanese said, well, can't you not exempt us because we are non-Muslims? And the government said no, and then they started to punish them, and that's why we had this war. So the Sharia laws will only tolerate minorities when they submit. Yeah, and that's the problem.
And to submit, meaning that they have to submit to their own rules and to their regulations. And if they're not allowed to have a worship gathering, then they can't have a worship gathering.
Exactly.
And how do you see the movement of underground churches in these countries?
Yeah. Well, that's the only way to survive. In some countries, you cannot even apply to have a church, a building. And here I'm not speaking about people who are Muslims became Christians. It's impossible for them to apply for anything. But even for those who have been born as Christians, you know, they have to worship very quietly. For converts, it is impossible. And that's why you have house churches, you have small groups, and in these countries you don't know who is a follower of Christ because the laws are not in their side.
Yeah. Let's talk about it case by case without generalizing, because we hear like in places like Iran, which Sharia law is religious law is, although they're Shia Muslims, but that law is the law of the country. And we hear that one of the fastest growing underground churches in the world is in Iran.
Yeah.
How can we help sitting here in the West in the comfort of our freedom? How can we be helping brothers and sisters in Christ that are suffering in countries like that?
Yeah. Well, first of all, when you spoke about Iran, I think what we could do is to pray.
Yeah.
You know, prayer has a power to change and to pray that the brothers and sisters, they will endure. You know, but you know, just let me say this: to suffer for Christ, this is not, for a Christian faith, is not the exception. Jesus went this road ahead of us. It's only in the West that we people live here in, you know, in freedom since many years. They bought into the idea to be a follower of Christ should not cost you anything. But following Christ has always a cost. And if your faith in Christ, if my following in Christ does not cost me anything, I have to question myself, where am I compromising? You know, and that's why Paul said, I may know him, Christ, and the power of his resurrection, and the fellowship of his suffering into his death. This is the Christian way of following Christ. Yeah. So, and that's why the church in Iran, first of all, we need to pray for them, that they will stand their ground, that their faith will not vanish, that they will have their freedom at the end of the day. But at the same time, we should ask ourselves, what can we learn from them? You know, if a woman in Tehran will take the risk of going in the street, claiming her right, you know, and her worship, I think you and I sitting in this country, we should talk louder and louder for Christ. So, and from this place, I would really like to offer a prayer for those brothers and sisters in Iran, that God will bring a freedom of religion, a freedom, political freedom, that people will just have a normal life like you and I. And the third thing that we could do is we could engage here, like in our society. You see, like the other day when things happened in Gaza, and many people went on the street, you know, and I asked myself, where are those people? You know, there's sometimes people did not know even where Gaza exists, but they went on the streets and for the right and for the people there. Where are they now? You know, I hope and I wish that many will go on the street and also stand for the brothers and sisters in Iran.
You said something interesting. We're used to, from a Western perspective, that if anyone is persecuted, then we should step in and help, because we're used to having our beliefs and faiths coming to us at no cost. Like, we should not pay for what we believe in. But coming from the Middle East and growing up Christian in the Middle East, to us, suffering and persecution comes kind of like part of the package.
Yeah.
Like, if you have not been persecuted or you suffered, then you have not earned, in some sense, your faith. So how can we come to terms here in the West that, I don't want to say that persecution is okay, but it should be expected? How can we grasp that idea, and how can we put it in a Western concept?
Yeah, we grasp it when we become fundamentally follower of Christ. This means we stand our ground for Christ. If a society start to temper with family, you know, we stand the ground and we say, well, family, according to the Bible, marriage is between a man and a woman, for instance. And, you know, all of those things that are going to cost us. So this means we need to cling to Jesus, to his word, and to have him as our foundation, and also to be ready to pay the price. But the problem is, in the West, what I see, that we started to customize church and a Christian living that to accommodate, to accommodate, like if the preaching about sin will upset people in church, drop it out. If speaking about holiness will upset people. So we are creating a kind of a wellness church, and then we just tell people what people here want to hear. The message of the Bible is a very confronting message. It calls us to holy life. It calls us to be committed to Christ. It calls us to swim actually against the tide that is coming.
We shouldn't be a comfortable church.
No, and that's why there is a lot to learn from the church who are in persecution. So the church which is persecuted, we should not pity them.
Yes.
But we should ask the Lord and say, help us when our faith is being tested, that we will stand our ground. So persecution in the Muslim world through political Islam, through extremist Islam. But let me tell you this: in the ages, the persecutors' names and faces changes.
Yes.
But the hate against the Christians will always remain. And the encouragement Jesus said to us, they will hate you because they hate me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's true. Well, I think we should all be praying, actively praying for the persecuted church.
Yes.
And as you mentioned, pray for the persecuted church to stand unshaken
Yes.
in their faith, to endure with courage in Christ, and even while being persecuted, to keep on praying and loving whoever is persecuting them. And for us to learn, if we can pray a prayer of learning,
Yes.
Learning how to endure, and praying for discernment, just for God's clear voice to be heard by us, that if we're not uncomfortable, then there's something wrong.
Yes.
We should be uncomfortable.
Yes.
And that is because Jesus did not live a comfortable life,
Yes.
nor did his followers and disciples.
Yes.
And that's where their impact
Yes.
stood the test of time,
Yes.
and everything else. It's getting out of our comfort zone and standing up for what's right,
Yes.
with grace and love.
Yes, absolutely.
Bishop Yasser, thank you so much.
Yeah.
This was very informative, eye-opening. Thank you, our listener, for being our number one supporter. We love you, and we love to pray for you. So send us your prayer requests at prayer@heartforlebanon.org, and go to heartforlebanon.org/prayer. Sign up to our prayer ministry, and we'll send you prayer requests from the field, from the families we serve, and from our team. Until the next episode, God is with you. Allah ma'akum.